Let's just confirm, is there such a thing as magic? Let's just be absolutely clear here. Is there such a thing? What is magic?
It depends on what you mean. I mean, there's an experience of magic, and I think it's a bit like the word hypnosis. I think it's a sort of an experience of something. If you actually break it down, then no, clearly there's nothing happening. I don't think that's magic in that sense of, wizardry, but the experience of it is something we can identify as magic.
Sorry, I'm lost. What does that mean? The experience of it?
Well,
it looks like magic.
If somebody, it looks like magic and smells like magic and sounds like magic, and it's being presented in a sort of a framework that's theatrical and safe and secular. So you kind of go, oh yeah, okay, that was a magical trick, but also not to stay up all night worrying about it too much because it's just a trick.
And you said that the people who are best suited to be your audience are people who are suggestible, sort of open to for certain tricks, certain illusions. People who are suggestible. What is it to be suggestible? Am I suggestible? What is a suggestible person? How can one tell if one's in the presence of a suggestible person?
You're probably not, and I think...
Is this a trick? This is a double... yeah. But is it what...
Suggestibility is a sort of... it's a very ordinary, everyday thing, really. It's a sort of emotional openness. Some people that are emotionally quite easily led, normally sociable, open, again, to use that word.
Not me.
Sort of people. The opposite of people that maybe take a detached viewpoint and sort of observe and have that kind of 3 or 4 steps back from life. I'm like that. I'm not very suggestible. I'm
sure you're not.
I know you're like that.
But what happens? So you'll tell them something and they will very easily be led. I mean,
yeah, but it happens all the time. Even those of us that aren't very suggestible, we all have experiences where we are. You might go and see a doctor, and you're suddenly in a relationship where you become very suggestible. You have an authority figure.
Right, so the doctor said there's a giant tumour raising it, and if there was absolutely nothing, you would believe it because the doctor said so.
Or more likely, if a doctor gives you a placebo and says this will work, it will work. Suddenly, you become. Now, if you're naturally suggestible, you are much more responsive to placebo. But we all become a bit responsive to that sort of thing because suddenly we're in that relationship that and we like that with doctors, we like it with teachers, we like it with a lot of authority figures. Because, of course, when we were little and Mum said, don't touch that, it's hot, we didn't... Having to question everything would be ridiculous. So
and you become that figure in your illusions. You become that medical authority figure.
Authority figure, and you play that role, and you use the tricks to sort of make that work.
And is it frightening to you sometimes with what ease people, that you could just get someone to, do something absolutely extraordinary just by looking them in the eye and telling them it's very important that you do this now?
It's not that, because that's sort of what it tends to look like.
There's the other 50 who said, no way.
Well, no, I just think you never quite know, of course, what's going on in the other person's head. I used to do a stage show of hypnosis years ago when I was starting out, and at the end I'd make myself invisible. It's quite a standard hoary hypnotist stunt. So you might
used to make yourself
I would make myself invisible. Yeah.
How is that possible?
So perhaps a little more explanation.
You can't say. You can't say.
All right. So maybe I've got 10 people on stage.
Yeah.
They're all very good subjects. This is one of the last things I do in the show, and I would say, when you open your eyes, you won't be able to see me. You'll be able to see everything else, you won't be able to see me, you'll think I've left the stage. But afterwards, I'd sort of do a Q&A afterwards, and I'd get the same people, and I'd say, what actually happened? On the range of experience from, well, no, we knew you were there, we were just sort of playing along because, we're on stage, through to a kind of, well, I sort of knew you were there, but it was a very genuine reaction. I was genuinely terrified, but no, of course, when I think back, no, of course you were there. And then at the other end of the spectrum, that was just floating, and I can't, of course you weren't, there was nobody there, that was just floating in there. Where were you? And it was sort of fairly evenly spread. There was people at this end of the spectrum that absolutely, were just seeing this thing floating, and others that were playing along. You never know, of course, it looks the same. And you never know whether those people at the end who were saying, no, that really was floating. Are they just saying it because they want to be the best people in the group? You never really know.
But you're saying there's a willingness. I mean, if we said, this bottle is now going to fly around the room, there would be a certain portion of the audience that would really want the bottle to fly around the room because it would be fun, it would be a different kind of evening to the normal school of life evening, and they could tell their friends and all. So there's a predisposition that the bottle flies around. If you saw me in half, one leg's over there, the head over there, and we want this to be possible, right? There's an impulse in us because that would be fun, right?
Yes, exactly. So I think it plays
if-
to, and there are plenty of people that respond very well to hypnosis on stage, but in a one-on-one setting aren't at all. And others that work very well one-on-one, but on stage they're uncomfortable, so it doesn't work. So I was saying that the power aspect of it isn't really quite what it looks like, because the reality is always much more sort of complex. And you realise that it's a game that you're sort of playing with people, and their consent is very important, and you never quite know whether, if you were using it for some sort of nefarious reason, you never quite know whether they're just sort of playing along, and at some point they're going to go, look, sorry, can we just stop this, because this is, and you wouldn't get away with it, or whether it really would.
Could you imagine? I mean, you've studied, Milgram, etc. We'll talk about him in a minute. But you've studied mass persuasion, etc. Do you feel that some of these techniques could be used really quite malevolently? We're talking fascism, etc. Are these techniques open to abuse?
Well, in a sense they are, and historically they have been. It may just be my temperament. I always err on thinking that it's not as powerful as it looks. And when I first started out, I saw everything in terms of suggestion. It really was this, for me, everything was this extraordinary kind of tool. And now I kind of tend to step back and think, well, it's not. It's just behaviour. It's just people's behaviour.
But then there are areas like self-confidence, in terms of suggestion, etc. The whole sort of placebo effect. There is this capacity to give people confidence that they didn't know they had. So yes. How does that work? How can you make someone more confident?
I think stories are very interesting in life and very important in life. And if you go and see a film and it says at the beginning, based on a true story, you know when you see those words that what you're going to see is not a perfect telling of the events that happened. You're going to see a neatened version with a beginning, middle, and an end. Perhaps some characters might be sort of conflated into one, and there'll be a clear hero and all the rest of it. So you have a natural sort of skepticism that comes into play. Likewise, if somebody tells you a story of what happened the other night, or an argument they got into, or some outrageous behaviour that, you know there's another side to that story. You apply a natural sort of skepticism. We very rarely think of applying the same skepticism to ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves about our own lives, which of course are the most important stories that we have. And I did a program on placebo where we set up a whole elaborate thing to make people think they were getting a super drug that would do various things depending on what group they're in. So there was one group, they were told it removes the experience of fear. And there were other groups told it would stop them smoking and so on. And it was really interesting to me because what became clear is that irrespective of what group it is, whether it's not being able to smoke, or people with terrible crippling anxieties, or allergies was another one that responded really well to it, that these things are really tied in with the stories we tell ourselves. And if you give yourself permission, or sometimes it's easier if somebody gives you permission, or you give someone else permission, to just change the story, to act out of character, to act as if the thing is no longer a problem, it's a very simple shift. And with that, the people that give up smoking in an instant and never go back to it, never have any trouble with it, are the people that decide, I'm going to be a non-smoker. So they change their story, they change that sort of identity, that label, as opposed to, all right, I must not smoke, I must try not to smoke, which of course is stressful, and you fail, you give up, and then when you do eventually have one, you think, well, I've failed, it's all gone wrong. Magic is about stories that we tell ourselves. You show somebody an A, B, and a C, a story, a beginning, middle, and end, that's an impossible story, seemingly. And of course the reality is, it's a bit like, based on a true story in a film. You know that what you're seeing is a tidied up version. So the reality is between A and B, there's all sorts of other stuff that happened, and B and C, other stuff happened, but we're given a full story. So these stories we tell ourselves create these very powerful illusions, and I think we should harness those stories, and I think that, so the first step is living a story, having a story in your life, and living some sort of considered life, I think is important. And there was a time when philosophy and psychology was sort of the same thing, and philosophy was about what it was to flourish and what it was to live well, and then that sort of became lost, and philosophy became a much sort of drier thing and became about language and analysis and not really about living well. That became sort of an embarrassing thing that no one really spoke about. So that got left to self-help gurus, and now that's we're left with this kind of positive thinking idea, this idea that we can kind of control the world and the universe and our destinies by thinking positively, or even that the universe cares, that we can send wishes out to the universe and it will reciprocate. And it's all that stuff just creates terrible anxiety because it fails and it's not a real, or we reach our goals and then don't know what to do next, or fixate so much on trying to achieve things in the future, and we're fed that quite insidiously from a young age. You know, Alan Watts has this nice thing about if you go to a concert, if you go and hear a piece of music, you don't just go for the end. You don't just go for the climax at the end. You know, you go for the whole piece of music. But from an early age, you know, we're taught about, well, what A levels are you going to do? You can do these A levels, so you can do this at university, so you can go and study that. And then you're studying, and then you're looking forward to the career, and then you're doing your job, but now you're looking forward to this promotion or that promotion. And life has happened, as Schopenhauer says, ad interim. It's just sort of happened in the meanwhile. And we didn't realize it was supposed to be like a piece of music. You were supposed to dance along the way. And I think these things are important. And then, so there's a sort of a framework that I think is there. And I think then after that, it's about realizing that happiness is a bit like the rainbow that symbolizes happiness is a good symbol for it. You know, you try and approach it directly, it dissipates and disappears. So you find these circuitous routes to it, which again the Greeks and the ancients were very, very hot on, finding these ways of, maybe it was about tranquility, maybe it wasn't about being happy as such, it was about removing anxiety and being tranquil, achieving this ataraxia, as they call it, which is what the Stoics, for example, and the Epicureans and others that a lot of you will know about, obviously, with the School of Life and Alan's sort of bringing back, and is now starting to become a much more popular idea as psychology has become more interested again in what makes the good life for people, and as philosophy is also starting to, there's this sort of marriage that's sort of, you know, they've been divorced for 100 years, now they're sort of coming back together, and it's, I think it's very exciting. And I'm working on a book on it. I'm starting to kind of, I've been sort of in the background writing a book for the last sort of 6 months, and we'll do so for another 6 months on that kind of subject.
Which was happiness? Happiness?
Yeah, on happiness.
And philosophy?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of ideas that have sort of got lost that I think are really rich, and they sort of get hijacked by self-help people, which it's not, you know, it's just bad. It doesn't say it's either bad science or it's bad. You know, if you think about it, every success story you read, every entrepreneur that says you've just got to focus on what you want, ignore all the naysayers. There'll be people that'll try and bring you down. You've got to ignore them. You focus and you believe and you keep chasing that goal, and that's how I got successful. That is also a perfect recipe for failure. It's exactly how you fail, isn't it? It's exactly how you fail. But the difference is the people that failed aren't writing those biographies. So you have, it's true, isn't it? So you have this perfect sort of confirmation bias. You've got this great sample of people that have told themselves a self-serving story that they're successful because they committed and they ignored all these people, which is rubbish. What we actually do, we actually live an x equals y axis. So along the x-axis, you've got all the things you want to achieve in life, and on the y-axis, you've got all the things that life throws at you, fortune, as they used to call it. We don't really allow for fortune anymore, which is a huge shame. And we live this thing in the middle, and Schopenhauer knew it, and Freud knew it. All psychoanalysis was, when Freud started, was just about restoring what he called natural happiness. It wasn't about being really happy. It was about, of course, life's generally a bit unhappy, and we'll just restore you to that, as opposed to unnatural happiness that people might be carrying around with them. So once we sort of realized that, and it's not, you can't control, you know, it's not about setting goals and then deciding every aspect of what your life's going to be about. That x equals y line is actually what life sort of is. And then you can maneuver within that, of course. You can maneuver that around, and you can take control where it's useful to do so. But we just fed so much nonsense. We're fed this sort of, you know, you just got to keep believing positively. And of course it just creates failure. It just, because it doesn't allow for actually what does go on in life, which is much more subtle. And you've said, but I thought it was such a lovely thought, that we need to rediscover tragedy, because that's what, well, you probably all know this because you know about Alain very well, but this idea of, you know, the Greeks knew about fortune, and that was something that was people were very aware of. And, you know, as you said yourself, people that are poor now, we refer to them as not necessarily financially poor. We refer to people as losers now, as they used to be unfortunates. and somehow they've lost the game now. I think it's such a brilliant thought, and that maybe rediscovering tragedy at some level is one way of discovering that. So yes, I wish we. Yeah, sorry, a lot to say on it.
That's a very beautiful and comprehensive answer. It's so sad that we've got to end it there. But please come back and visit us. You've been fantastic, so interesting.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Derren Brown, for coming to visit us.
Thank you.
Thank
It's a wallet.
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.